Walt, have you seen the salt? The shaker's all out, and I'd love to put some on this lovely bruschetta. What the hell is going on here? Is that a pentagram on the floor? Is it made of salt? Where did you get all those candles? Why are you chanting? Who is strapped to the wall on the St. Andrew's cross? What's in the goblet? And what is... Oh, you know what? I don't care. I'm taking a pinch of salt from my bruschetta.
No, don't touch it. Don't touch it. If you break the circle, the ritual will never work. By the way, it's Abe under the mask, strapped to the cross. He said he was happy to help us out.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask what this ritual is. I'm not stupid.
Oh, come on, please. I think this will finally work. The candles are lemon-scented, and it's Ribena in the goblet, if that helps.
Fine. My lord, Walt, I am shaken. What ritual are you performing?
The 7th verse of the Book of Lucifer, to summon all the power from the 9 circles of hell to earth.
Whoa, that was intense. And what exactly does all the power of the 9 circles of hell look like then?
Money. It's money.
Oh, whoa. That was poignant.
Yeah. The funny part of all this is that what I was chanting earlier was "If I Were a Rich Man" from Fiddler on the Roof. If I were a rich...
It's a great song, but as a ritual to summon money, I don't think it's quite going to work.
No, I don't think "If I Were a Rich Man" is what gets you there, most likely. Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast. It's the GCP, brought to you by POG, Palms Off Gaming, sponsor of this podcast, the bread capital of the world. I'm your host, Walt.
Yep, that's it. Palms Off Gaming and Get Commanded, bringing you the sourdough loaf of the year.
That's it.
Hello, Commander players. I am still on hold with the bloody bank, James.
Oh, mate. That's especially
weirdly,
pertinent right now.
Yeah, we've got some Get Commanded banking
Going
things
on.
that we're trying to get sorted, which I am in the lovely job of taking care of.
And we love you so much. Before we get to the transmission, the absolute best way to support the Get Commanded podcast is over on Patreon.
It is, yeah. And look, at the moment, we want to shout the Patreon supporters out 10 times more than we already do, because you guys are the reason we are able to get to Sydney for Command Fest.
Yeah.
Coming up on the 12th and 14th to the 14th of July. Petersham Town Hall, hosted by Good Games Australia, will be there. Get your tickets in the link below. But Patreon, really, that's like how we're able to do this. Good Games invite us, Good Games give us a little bit of help, but Patreon are covering pretty much all our costs to be able to do this, which is huge.
Look, me and James, to be completely frank, are pretty tight for cash at the moment. We are in a cost of living crisis here in Melbourne. It's
we are in our mid-20s.
We are in our mid-20s. And also, your partner just had top surgery, of course. Yep. I have just completed a show and I've not been paid for that show yet.
So it's been months of work with no payoff.
Literally no payoff. I've just been devoting a third of my week to that thing for the whole time. I don't know that it would have been possible to get to this Command Fest in Sydney if it wasn't for obviously the help from Good Games Australia. But I'm happy to let you all know Patreon are covering the rest of the costs that we have. And we think that's just so cool that we are able to go to this event and meet more of you and play games and promote this awesome thing that we get to do. And it's really, really thanks to all of you over on Patreon. So we can't thank you enough. And if you just listen to us every week, you love what we make, it's just the best way to support the content we do.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we're going to be going to this Command Fest, hopefully to grow our audience, to hopefully grow the Patreon, and then we can do bigger and better things. If you've ever messaged Walter or I and saying, hey, we'd love to see the game night style in-person edited gameplay, we'd love to see merch, all of that kind of stuff, we can only do that with the support from Patreon.
Yeah, straight up.
So if you do want to see all that kind of stuff happen, go to patreon.com/getcommandedpodcasts. There's a bunch of rewards on there for you. I'm already booking in the next lot of Patreon games with our patrons, which is really exciting.
Awesome.
I always love those Patreon games. We get to see some really wild decks. One of our Space Commanders, Fletcher, builds a deck every single patron game, especially for us, which is really cool. But if you want to be a part of that amazing group, please go and support. It really, really is the best way to support what Walt and I do.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of what we do, we have an incoming transmission.
Good segue.
Thanks. From the deep depths of the galaxy, from the Space Commanders. It's time to get commanded.
Salty cards are typically extremely powerful in nature, but they are known to induce powerful negative emotions. Caution is apt, and identifying the underlying potential for emotional harm is essential.
Okay, we're looking at salty cards.
Salty cards. It's funny, like we've talked a lot about the Space Commanders vocabulary in the last few episodes. Salty is not a card I would have associated with them. It's very colloquial.
Yeah, I feel like they're not only getting the lingo of, pompous upper class people, they've also got those, yokel slang terms like we use.
Next time they'll call us mates or something,
Just get on the transmission. G'day, mates. Next time we're actually we're going to be looking at salty cards this week. But yeah, specifically, we're looking at salty cards and specifically what makes them salty cards, so we can identify what to try and avoid putting in our decks because of the effect of salty cards, which is making people feel powerful negative emotions.
Yeah. Look, I'm imagining that the best way for us to do this is EDH Rec, right? Because they do, every year they do a community poll with like thousands of people who enter this, and they measure the salt level of cards. And they basically, you choose a rank from 1 to 4, I think.
Yeah,
and 4 is like,
it's quite
I hate
cute.
it.
I actually did it a couple of years ago. That you can go log onto their website. It's like little salt shakers. So like, you know how you get like jalapenos for like spice levels on menus?
It's like that,
it's like
salt.
That, but salt shakers.
It wasn't
it's
like that last
cute.
time I did that. I like that. That's fun. But yeah, I think a 4 is like, this card is extremely salt-inducing.
Top end.
And 1 is like, I'm not really that worried about this card.
You can vote none. You can give it a 0.
Oh, you can give it a 0 as well. Okay.
I did
yeah, cool. Well, they must pull this massive list of cards that they know that might be salty, but then they release the salt levels and they order them, right? So you can see the saltiest cards and the least salty.
And I think that we're going to talk about cards here that you would not be shocked to hear about.
No.
We're going to talk about some cards that you might have played against and you're already aware of, just that they are salt-inducing cards. What we're going to try and do is try and find out what it is about them that makes them salty. So in the future, we can identify cards that, we'll release this episode, and then there'll be, by the time we record this episode and by the time it releases, there's at least 5 Magic sets set to release. So we want to be able to identify what about a new card being released might actually induce some salt in our playgroup.
Oh, I mean, if we look just specifically at Modern Horizons 3...
Oh, sweet Jesus.
I think just the Commander Nadu is likely to end up on this list of salt because of what we'll go into later around taking up most of the game. But we'll address that later. But yeah, so we're trying to find what are the specific negative emotions that are being brought up and what's causing them, right? Like when we look at this card, what is it that's making people get salty about it?
Well, I feel like it's probably good to start with those negative emotions and just highlight to everyone that maybe some new players that haven't experienced salt of why salt is generally a pretty bad thing to have happen in your game.
Yeah, while we try to avoid it.
And what these negative, because like the negative emotions come up in games, of course, but what are I think the things that are bad are like the knock-on effects that happen, especially in like frequent play groups. I think this happens pretty commonly. Like
if you've got a regular group of people you play with, even if it's not, more than 3 others, if you have like a group of 8 or 10 who you play with frequently, you're still going to remember the cards and things that people did in the games before, and people are going to remember the things that you did in the games that you played with them before as well.
I think that's like the biggest one. Like grudges carry over. Like the second you use a salty card and someone gets affected by a salty card, that feeling that they had is going to carry over into future games, and that's going to affect their targeted removal.
Yep.
That's going to affect their threat assessment because it's probably coming at you if you use that salty card.
Yeah. I mean, look, even if it's just that they don't like that specific card, like let's say they're threat assessing properly and they're not getting the blinders on you because you played this card they don't like, and they just hate that one specific card, they're still probably going to use their removal on it because they don't like it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if I see a card that I'm just like, I hate what this card is doing to the game we're playing, I'm going to do everything I can to get rid of it just regardless, right? Because I don't want
all
it
my
there.
effort is going into that. And like, even if it's not on the battlefield yet, I think that you do get those blinders, don't you? Like, it's like,
it happens.
I know you run this card. I'm going to get you before you even get a chance to play it.
Yeah, I mean,
know?
sometimes, like, you know, it's the synergy that a card has with another card. And so you see that other card come down and you go like,
Oh, crap. If they get that card, if they get the salty card.
You know, I'm sure we're going to go into this later, but like someone drops a Draneth Magistrate, and then you see a Teferi's Puzzle Box. And it's like, oh, is that the
No,
one
not
that
Teferi's
works?
Puzzle
No.
Box. You're thinking of the one that exiles cards to the middle of the table.
Oh, there's a I know what it's...
Oh, I can't remember it now. But if you make everyone's hands inaccessible and they can't cast spells from exile, they completely get locked out by Grand
your opponents don't
Magistrate,
get to do anything, and you get to do everything you want to. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's some other stuff that happens with salty cards that can knock on, and that's like affecting personal relationships.
Yeah.
Like if you have a moment in game where, and like we've had this before, me and you, like we've had some salty cards cast between us both, and we've gone, like in game, fuck you, Walt, like really hate you, and then like later that evening we'll be like still not talking to each other because it's still affecting how that dynamic plays out.
Look, like, it is just a game, and that's primarily where we should be coming at these things from. But equally, it's a thing you do with people that you care about for many hours of a week.
It's the social format, remember?
Yeah, and so, like, if you are engaging in socializing in any way that people don't like, it's gonna affect what they think of you. It's just like the world that we live in. And so, yes, it's a game. Yes, we should expect to see some number of cards we don't like. But yeah, like, if people repeatedly do things that upset you, I think it's kind of reasonable sometimes to go like, I wish you wouldn't do that, dude.
Yeah. I mean, like, even further on from that, people would just stop playing with you. Like, you know, if you are someone that's like, I'm going to cast this salty card over and over and over again, or I'm going to put it in every deck because why wouldn't I? People are just like, I don't really want to play a game where you cast Draneth Magistrate every game.
Yeah.
I just don't want to do that.
Well, and I think the potentially even worse thing that can happen is like, because I think avoiding is like a reasonable way to deal with this. The worst way to deal with it is that the arms race starts, right? Where you start going like, because you're playing Draneth Magistrate, it's now fine for me to play Rest in Peace against your graveyard deck. And because I'm playing Rest in Peace, now you're going to play Aura of Silence. And now that you're on Aura of Silence, I'm going to make it so we can't sacrifice things by playing Boromir. And it's like, now it's in this brutal
now
thing.
I'm going to start playing Contamination Priest to stop your flickering stuff.
Yeah,
and like,
it's just like this whole thing of being like, okay, like now we're in this so much worse scenario than we were before.
And now your decks are objectively worse because you're just building them to play against each other.
Silver bullets. I remember playing against, I sat down with someone, this is a few months back now at our game store, and there were two guys who usually played with a very regular play group, and just the two of them had come to the store, and so there were two of us who hadn't played with them before, and they hadn't played with us or anything. That's usually how it works.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it would be really weird if you hadn't played with them, but they had played with you.
While I was asleep.
Yeah. Shh, Walt, and then you tap these cards, moving your hand very gently while you sleep.
Man, I love playing with you, Walt. Especially because you
sweet, my sweet prince.
Man, Walt, you play so poorly. I love it. Anyway, I was playing with them, and they kept on playing these cards, and I was like, that seems so narrow. Like stuff like,
really targeted.
Like it wasn't the card that we played, but like as an example, like a card like Stranglehold. Players can't gain life.
Yeah.
If someone would begin an extra turn, they skip it instead. And I was like, this feels very much like it's pointed at someone. And they kept playing these cards, and I kept being like, this doesn't really feel like it does much. And they kept being like, don't worry, when we play with blah blah, it completely shuts down his deck.
Yeah.
And I got to the end of the game, and I basically said to them, I was like, look, like, that's fair. If you guys always play with the same people, I think you should probably try to avoid building decks like this, because when you come and play with anybody else, they won't work.
Yeah.
And you're spending so
that
much of your time.
Does actually nothing against me.
You end up spending all your time resolving spells that just stop people rather than actually trying to win.
But also, even the spells that you're resolving to, quote, stop people, don't stop people, because like you might not be playing any extra turn spells or anything that Stranglehold cares about.
Yeah, or you're shutting down that one player at the expense of now they can't interact in a way that stops the other two players, and it's a whole thing.
All right, let's move on to like the actual salt-inducing cards.
Sure.
I do want to put a caveat here that this obviously is excluding CDH.
Of course.
As with most of our episodes, we are excluding CDH from this conversation. But I actually think that there are some higher powered pods that will allow some of these salty cards at their tables because they're trying to play at a very high level of Magic.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that Rule 0 is a conversation that should happen at the beginning of all casual games, including high-powered.
Yes.
And if you are running these salty cards, it's probably worth highlighting. We discussed this in depth only a couple of episodes ago in high-powered casual. That's episode 87.
Yep.
You can go check that out, but that's still a good thing to do if you're playing high-powered casual is highlighting these cards.
Big time. I think that, like we spoke about in high-powered casual, how that band of acceptable things in high-powered is quite wide, but it depends so much on who you're playing with. Because there will be people who are willing to approach high-powered like CDH and go anything goes, do whatever the hell you want. And there will be people who are like, no, I want to play an interactive and fun game. I don't want stacks.
And or I don't want land destruction.
Yeah, which is totally reasonable expectation. So yeah, Rule 0, as always.
Something I noticed when I was on the EDH rec page of the salt-inducing cards.
Did you open the command in advance?
I might have. I've already prepared a list for us.
Someone's got to do it.
Yeah.
Someone's got to do it.
I identified 3 main categories that most cards on that list fit into. And I think that this might be a way for us to go about this episode and break it down. The 3 categories that I identified were cards that you can almost imagine them saying this, right? Like the card jumps out and gets a voice and says this. One card says, I win.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Bring the game to an end.
Pretty salt-inducing thing of just like, I win now.
Yep.
The other one is you lose.
Makes sense.
Which is slightly different to I win. It's like, I'm not winning, but you're definitely not winning.
This is, I think, where a lot of the stacksy sort of effects will end up.
We'll definitely see some of those. And then the third one, which I was kind of like, there is not as many of these, but they definitely exist, is the card that says nobody wins. Let's just change this game completely.
You're talking about cards that draw the game.
I mean, there is a card, Divine Intervention does say, where that is on the salt list. Divine Intervention is on the salt list that just says the game ends in a draw.
I do think that card is stupid. But no, I imagine that's not what nobody wins. I imagine we're talking specifically about cards that kind of make it so that the game doesn't matter anymore.
Yes, or like it creates a sub-game, or if it just creates chaos, that kind of thing. We'll get there, but like some cards actually spread across 2 categories.
That makes sense.
Which,
I think the I win, you lose is going to be a similar kind of vibe sometimes, where it's a card that's like, I completely shut you down, which makes me win the game kind of thing. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And look, I would like to point out that conveniently, these categories fit very conveniently into one of our questions on the Rule 0 template that we use. Our first question is, how do you win the game?
Yep, that covers I win cards. Yep.
And the third question on our Rule 0 template is, how do you stop your opponents from winning?
Yep.
That's the you lose category type of card. So
big time.
It's really easy to be able to identify these in Rule 0 conversations to make sure you're playing games that are fun for everyone and people are aware of what's coming.
Love it. Love it. So we start with I win.
Yes, I reckon we do. So these are obviously the cards that have such a powerful effect that they either win the game on resolution or effectively / eventually win the game because of the effect it can have.
Sure. And I think typically what makes us salty is that they don't explicitly win the game.
Yeah.
But you get such an insurmountable advantage that you effectively win the game. Sometimes that can be worse because you often have to, quote, play it out, right? Like, okay, let's see your 5 extra turns.
Yeah. Surely you find a win in there somewhere, but we don't know you do.
And
so let's go for
someone's like,
it.
oh, here's Approach of the Second Sun. It's like, oh, thank God.
Finally.
And now we only have to watch you draw 7 more cards.
I mean, look, I think it's worth pointing out that some of these cards are really good. Like,
of course.
The reason why they say I win the game is because they're so powerful, right?
Yeah.
But if they're amazing, why wouldn't we just run them in every deck? And I think that it's worth us analyzing specifically each card of what makes it salty. Because remember, the Space Commanders want us to say, what is it about this good card, really, that makes us salty? And realistically, every one of our decks should be running cards that say, when this card resolves, if I've set up the right board state, I win the game.
Yeah.
That's what a win condition is, right?
Absolutely. But I guess that some of these cards, it's going to be the way that it wins the game.
Yeah.
Or often I think it's going to be about how stoppable is this?
Correct.
How much ability do I have to prevent this card from running away with the game? And I think usually the answer is going to be not much.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think it is like, how much setup does this card need to win a game? Like,
big
whereas,
time.
like, Overwhelming Stampede, for example, is a win condition.
Yeah.
But that needs you to have a lot of creatures and a big creature to be good, right?
But some of these cards kind of win the game almost on their own.
Correct.
Yeah, big time.
Should we just
let's
dive
hop
into
the
some
list.
cards?
The top card is one that this takes me way back because this was the only card I ever won with in my first Commander deck. Expropriate.
Yeah, definitely a card that induced salt in your friends, i.e. me.
Yeah, I took it out of the deck because I realized I only ever won if I resolved it.
Yeah.
Expropriate for 7 blues. It's 9 mana. It's a council's judgment, a will of the council. So everyone votes. You vote for time or money. And if you vote for time, the player who casts Expropriate gets an extra turn, and for each money vote, you gain control of a permanent that player controls.
So at its floor, you get an extra turn because you always vote for extra turn.
Yeah, you don't need any of your permanents. You've already got them.
You already got them.
And
And then
the salt score, by the way, is 2.51 here, so quite high. Quite
pretty
high.
high score for this card. And I think that, at its floor, you get an extra turn and 3 permanents, one from everyone's board, which is usually their best permanent, which reduces their chance of winning pretty dramatically. This card says I win if it resolves.
Big time. I mean, look, if nothing else, it can do the you lose thing of you can take everyone's commanders.
Yeah.
Straight up. Because by the way, it is 90% of the time it is correct to choose money.
Yeah.
Yes, you love your permanents. It is so much worse to give someone 4 extra turns.
Yeah.
Where they definitely will get you. And look, I think the big thing here is that like, this doesn't, it does usually win you the game, but not on the spot. You have to play out the extra turn. You have to take the cards and try and win with these permanents from your opponents. Your opponents have to untap without their commander and go, how do I win without my commander? Do I have a removal spell for my commander so I can then recast my commander?
Yep.
Like, it adds 30 minutes to the game, right?
And I think that that's the thing that makes it salty, right?
Yeah,
It's like this card says I win, but you're going to have to watch me first. Like,
bear
look
with
at me,
me.
look at me. And I think that kind of, we should probably lump all extra turn spells in together while we're talking about Expropriate. Because like, I think there was a lot of extra turn spells on the Salt list.
Okay.
There was Time Stretch, which is to take 2 extra turns. There was Nexus of Fate, which shuffles into your library.
Yeah, I imagine there was a Time Warp in there.
There's a Time
the 5
Warp.
mana take an extra turn. There's the 6 mana one with buyback of sack 3 lands. Like Temporal Trespass. There's lots of extra turn spells that we see.
And I think that extra turn spells induce Salt because everyone wants to play the game of Commander because it's so much fun.
Yeah.
Not many people are playing Commander because they want to watch someone else play Commander.
No.
If I want to watch someone else play Commander, I'm going to watch Commander at home on YouTube. Or like
Or
EDH
Game Nights or something.
Game Nights, something like that. That's the thing that makes it salty.
It's a big thing, I think, is that like extra turns by their nature don't say I win on them. They say, watch me find a win in these next 20 minutes as I untap, upkeep, draw, try and find a win, don't have it, draw more cards, etc., etc., etc. I think I also want to highlight with Expropriate specifically that it is also the theft effect.
Yeah.
I
People
think
don't
that
like their shit being taken.
People don't like their shit being taken, and I think it's having both of these effects on the same card that I think is the reason why this is the top of this category.
And it's relatively castable too for 7 blue. Like it's not like it's a multicolored spell.
No,
like this
it's not in Simic or Azorius or something.
This could feasibly be a good top end to your mana curve in any deck containing blue.
Yeah.
It's 2 blue pips. It's not like 2 blue is hard to cast in even a 5 color deck.
No.
Like it's really achievable. This could be at the top end of your curve in any blue deck, and I think that's what annoys people about it as well. Is like, why wouldn't? Yes, of course you're playing that because it's the only thing that you can win with. Yeah. And that's how I felt with your old deck, to be honest.
Which is honestly totally fair.
Yeah.
I cut it because I was just like, this is boring. Like, it's terrible for my opponents, and I literally this is my only win con.
Yeah.
And it forced me to go like, okay, like how does my deck actually win with this strategy rather than just stealing stuff and taking extra turns? Yeah.
The next card on my list is the One Ring. I'm not sure if you've heard of this card.
Wow.
Very very underplayed, not really well-known card. This has a salt score of 2.21, by the way.
I'm surprised it wasn't the top score, given that the One Ring is specifically supposed to bring them all and in the darkness bind them. I don't know. It seems like it's not really doing that at this particular score.
True. And the volcano that they throw it into is actually a salt volcano. It's Himalayan pink rock salt is the salt that destroys the One Ring.
That's why Sauron was hoarding it. He wanted all that Himalayan rock salt for himself.
2.21's pretty high
It's
for
pretty
a card
high.
advantage piece.
I'm realizing I haven't checked this category in a while because the One Ring has come out since I last looked at the salt scores. I think it's totally reasonable that it's this high up. The card advantage obviously is through the roof. This is the one that just taps. You put a burden counter on it, draw a card for each burden counter on it. You lose life in your upkeep, blah, blah, blah. Who cares about that? It's mostly the fact that you draw a card on the first turn you cast it. Oh, you're still getting protection from everything.
Just because. Why not?
God, until
Why
your
not?
next turn when you cast it, if you cast it.
Yeah.
Insane.
I think that obviously the insane card advantage is the bit about this card that makes it say I win, fit into this category. But I think the thing that makes it salty and the thing that we're going to be looking out for here is that it's incredibly hard to remove.
Yeah,
like,
it's indestructible.
An indestructible artifact as well. Like, artifacts are typically harder to target or harder to interact with. And most sweep artifact effects are destroy, so it doesn't get hit by that.
Yeah, it's only really those like farewell style effects in white that exile artifacts specifically.
It can feel like an insurmountable challenge. I'm now realizing why Sauron felt so like annoyed because Frodo had the ring, because he was like, God damn it, I just want to play the game, man. It's not fair that you have the ring. That's exactly what was happening.
It's a great Sauron impression as well, by the way.
God damn it, man. Hey, the ring.
Frodo, Frodo, stop it, bro.
Stop it.
I want to play with that. Anyway.
In the darkness, bind them.
Look, I've said before about the One Ring. I think you could print it with any two of the three things that it does, and it would be fine.
Yeah.
It could be an indestructible artifact that draws cards. It could be an indestructible artifact that gains you protection from everything for a turn. It should not do all of the things that it does. Anyway, we're not card designers. We won't go into that. But yeah, it is so difficult to deal with because you gain protection from everything. So just on its base, it's like cool. Incredible fog.
It's weird Teferi's protection in advance of someone's win con. And that can be really annoying as well. Like, someone's like clearly about to win the game, like set up all their pieces, like big board, ready to swing out.
Yeah.
And the player goes, I know how to get out of this.
Yeah.
One ring. I gain protection for everything. You can kill everyone else, but then I get to untap.
And also I get at least three cards I'm going to draw here, right? I draw a card this turn, draw two more the next turn.
For 4 mana.
And it's indestructible. Yeah, it's so hard to deal with. And I've said before, like in CEDH games specifically that I've played, it's just so irritating.
It absolutely warps the game.
It just warps the game around it. Like if someone casts the One Ring and say, okay, they've got a clock until they win, because that's just CEDH. If you have the best cards in your deck, you will win.
And if you can draw them that well,
and then it's like someone plays a Phyrexian Metamorph and it's a One Ring, and it's like, okay, great. Like, you know, if the best way to deal with something is to have one of your own, that is not a good card to be playing in any format. It shouldn't be like, oh, the only way to do it with the One Ring is by having your own One Ring. That's bad.
It's also colorless, so it when I was saying about expropriate, how it can go in any blue deck, this can go in any deck, and the argument to not put it in any deck is so low.
It's literally only that it's salty, and that you might find it boring, which
and
is also
it
totally
costs
reasonable.
like $35-$40
or more now. I think it's like $80 now.
Is it $80
It just keeps
now?
getting. I mean, it's
Jeez,
like ubiquitous in every format
until it gets reprinted. It would just probably keep climbing.
And when's it gonna get reprinted?
It'll probably. I reckon it might get a Universes Within because it's so powerful, and it's warping so many formats.
Yeah,
I
they
wouldn't
have
be
to
shocked
reprint it.
if they do a Universes Within version of it.
And in Modern Horizons 4,
You can expect to see
the 2 ring. Anyway,
Soul Ring +1. Another card that fits into this category, weirdly, is a board wipe. Probably the best board wipe in our format, Cyclonic Rift.
Yeah, 2.43 is the salt score here. So higher than the One Ring, lower than Expropriate.
Yeah, pretty intense. Like Expropriate is a card that says, like, I'm taking stuff from you, you're going to have to watch me.
Yeah.
This is a board wipe at the end of the day.
Yeah.
We all run board wipes, but this is the best board wipe in our format.
It's just like, there's a reason if you see someone with 7 untapped mana and one of it is blue that you expect Cyclonic Rift. It's ubiquitous. There's a few things that's factoring in here. Some people just don't like board wipes in general, which is reasonable. Like, we've spoken before about how you can board wipe too much and it can slow down the game. The problem with Cyclonic Rift is there is just no reason not to do it, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's 7 mana, but it's instant speed. So you just get to take a full turn off, wait for your opponents to deploy a bunch of stuff, go like, okay, cool, all of that is blanked.
Yeah.
You don't do anything, and now I have to, again, it's kind of similar to Expropriate, where it's like, they don't win when they cast Cyclonic Rift.
No.
They just reset you to such an extent that, like, the likelihood you come back against the Cyclonic Rift player is so low if they time it correctly, and they usually do.
So that it kind of crosses into that you lose category
Big time.
as well.
Big time.
The reason why it's so powerful is because, like, you think about how it's played. It's played on the end step before your turn.
Yeah.
So you cast it right before you untap. So we usually say, and we've said this about board wipes before, the first player to rebuild after a board wipe increases their chance of winning pretty significantly.
Massively.
When you cast Cyclonic Rift, you're the first person to untap, but you don't need to rebuild a board because it only bounces your opponent's things. All non-land permanents your opponents control go to their hands, and nothing of yours is affected.
No.
If you don't win from an end step before your turn Cyclonic Rift, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, it's unbelievably powerful. And look, like, I think it's worth pointing out how much these days Commander is about tokens, and Cyclonic Rift does just destroy them, right? Like, if you bounce a token to your hand, it ceases to exist. And just generally going wide on a board, even if it's with actual creatures, like when you untap after the Cyclonic Rift player, and you've got everything in your hand, like you're typically trying to like drop as many rocks as you can. You try to drop all your dorks, as many as you can possibly get out of your hand. You typically have to discard a bunch of cards anyway, because you've bounced maybe 5, 10, 15
it's almost
cards.
better in that circumstance. It's like you didn't just like bounce everything to your opponent's hand. You actually put some of those things into the graveyard.
It was effectively return all non-land permanents to their hand and make them discard 6 cards.
Yeah.
It's like, that card is busted, and it is.
It's crazy.
It deserves this salt score. It's interesting, with Expropriate and stuff, we spoke about similar things. There's not really any cards like Cyclonic Rift to me. There's nothing else that's instant speed and one-sided.
Ugin's Binding, the new
true.
weird. So this was the 2 and a blue. You cast it.
You return a non-land permanent your opponent controls to their hand.
And then when it's in the graveyard, it has an ability of when you cast a colorless spell for 7 CMC
or more,
you cast it overloaded, but you cast Cyclonic Rift from your graveyard.
You return each non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand.
I think a lot of people freaked out too much about this card.
Yeah.
I think it's so much more narrow than people think Ugin's Binding would be.
Oh, big time. I mean, like, the 2 hoops you have to jump through are... You have to be in blue, which admittedly is pretty small, but you also have to cast a colorless 7-mana spell. So suddenly you're looking at, specifically, really, an Eldrazi deck that has color in it.
Or you're finding your 1 Meteor Golem. And you're just digging for that Meteor Golem.
If this card only works as a board wipe if you find specifically Meteor Golem, it's terrible.
Shit, it's actually
so
bad.
Yeah, this will not do a Cyclonic Rift impression except in colored Eldrazi decks, which will be rare except for maybe Ulalek, the new 5-color.
It'll be rare, but not within the next 5 months because everyone will be building them.
Building Ulalek.
And then in 1 year time, we'll forget Ugin's Binding exists. But that's why Cyclonic Rift has such a high salt score, and no one's salty at Ugin's Binding.
No.
Because Ugin's Binding is not Cyclonic Rift.
No,
it's not doing the same stuff.
It's not doing. Look, one of the biggest problems with Cyclonic Rift as well, it's 6 and a blue to overload
It's
it.
one color.
It's one blue. I have seen 5 color decks play Cyclonic Rift because why not?
5 color decks in CEDH like Kenrith are playing Cyclonic Rift because why wouldn't you?
Why not? There's literally no reason not to. It's crazy.
Another card on my list is kind of a board wipe, kind of. It's Elishnorn, Grand Cenobite.
Oh, the old Elishnorn.
OG Elishnorn. This had a salt score of 1.83, so not nearly as high as the cards we were talking about earlier.
Jumped down quite a lot already.
Pretty significant drop down.
So this is the 7-mana creature. It's a 4/7 with Vigilance, I think.
5 white, yep.
Yep. Each creature your opponent's control gets -2/-2. Each creature you control gets +2/+2.
So
this is a static effect. Yeah. Right? This is a board wipe in that you never ever play a token.
Yes, ever again.
Nope.
And like not even just tokens, like -2 toughness kills so many relevant creatures in Commander.
Big time.
Like it kills so many draw engines like Fairy Masterminds.
Every dork ever,
every dork ever, yeah.
Yep.
This is 2 cards stapled onto one. It's an overrun effect and it's a board wipe. And they're static.
Yeah.
And they happen on 1 card.
Yeah.
And like it's also a 4/7. Like it's pretty hard to kill as well.
It's interesting. Like I understand the salt score here because if you are playing against a deck that needs small creatures in any fashion, if your commander is small, if you're playing dorks, if you're playing tokens, then it's so hard to get out from under this, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of your engines and your card draw and stuff will be stapled to these small creatures as well.
Yeah.
But like, I think I see also why we've dropped quite far in Salt already. Because like, the 3 cards we looked at already, I'm like, okay, those are
10 times worse to me personally than
me too.
this.
Me too. It's very annoying to play against. And if you are that deck that needs 2 toughness creatures, it feels awful to play against Elish Non, because it's like, until I draw a board wipe or a target removal spell, I'm out of this. But it's not that awful.
No, but I will point out that this is the first legendary creature we've had on the list.
True. So this can be a commander.
Do you think it gets worse if it's in the command zone and
Absolutely.
you always have access to it? I think
Absolutely.
that's where the Salt score comes from.
Maybe that's it. I can't say I've ever seen an Elish Non Grand Cenobite deck myself.
I have.
You have?
I have
Okay.
seen a few.
Right.
Someone in our playgroup has been on our stream, Brad.
Oh, yeah.
Very great player. Used to have a Grand Cenobite
Right.
deck, and it was basically just mono white weenies
Yeah.
with Elish Non in command zone.
Right.
And to be honest, like, he just ran so much ramp that
Right.
Elish Non came out so frequently. I understand why there is a reasonable Salt score on this, because
Yeah.
it is like, oh my god, you've cast your 5th board wipe this game just because it's your commander, but I
Yeah.
have to remove it because I won't be able to win otherwise.
Yeah, it's sort of like it reminds me a bit of when someone would deploy a Rest in Peace and I was playing my Arami of the Dead Tide deck,
Yeah.
where it was like, for some people at the table, they were kind of like, oh, that's a bit annoying. But for me, my game is over until I deal with that thing.
Kind of crosses into the you lose strategy if
Yeah.
it's doing that to you.
I think so. And so I understand the Salt score here. You kind of have to answer it.
But I think the Salt score is coming from the fact that it's an incredibly powerful card because it's stapling 2 very strong effects
Yep.
to a static ability on 1 card.
Yep.
But it's also, if it is hosing you, it's hosing you.
Big time.
What else do you think is on this Salt score list? You want
Well,
to pick a card
I'm
from the list?
looking here and I'm seeing, Teferi's Protection with a 1.7. So we've dropped again in Salt. This is a card we see quite a lot, I would say.
This is probably much more ubiquitous than the other cards we've talked about.
Pretty much everything. I still see a fair bit of Cyclonic Growth, but admittedly not much in my play group, whereas Teferi's Protection you see pretty much everywhere.
Yep. I run this card in pretty much every white deck I have.
Yeah. Look, I think it's just the perfect answer, right? Like, we talk a lot about how it's good to have protection pieces in your deck, like cards like Heroic Intervention and this kind of thing.
And we always do the joke of like, oh yeah, Teferi's Protection could be one of those cards.
Because it's like, obviously it is, right? Like, it's just, there's so few times where this doesn't get you out of it. And I think that's, it's why it's so good and why it's played so much. It's like, it's reasonable that people play this card.
Yeah.
But it's also why it's so boring. It's like, of course Teferi's Protection saves you here.
Yeah.
Because it's Teferi's Protection. It's like, even, I've spoken before about how I don't like the card Clever Concealment. This is the one for 3 and a white. You any number of non-land permanents you control phase out, but has Convoke, so it effectively can be free. But even in that case, if someone's attacking you, like goes to board wipe, and then you're like, okay, I'll save my board by phasing out everything, then there's 2 players who might be able to attack you for lethal and kill you. Like, there are ways out. It's not
But
the
Teferi's
perfect...
Protection is Clever Concealment plus Angel's Grace.
Yeah.
In this situation. And then like it can even act as like a weird counterspell, like in response to a board wipe.
Someone can cast a Giant's Immolating Inferno, and you're like, cool, Teferi's Protection.
Yeah, it can cast as a fog. It can cast... This card does literally everything.
It's just the complete, like, blank everything your opponents are doing for a full turn cycle.
And I think the Salt comes from the fact that people get frustrated. I mean, people get frustrated at counterspells, right?
Yeah.
Let alone spells that just do what a counterspell could have done, but adds protection and phases out all your permanents. And
Teferi's Protection can feel like it counterspells 4 spells,
yes.
right? Because it not only does it might it counter the overrun effectively on the stack, because now it's like that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But it's also like, okay, those 3 creatures that would have killed me are now kind of counterspelled for a turn.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it just always gets you out, and it just kind of feels kind of slimy. It's like, oh god, of course you're out of this. Like, Teferi's Protection, whatever.
Kind of feels like Saul Goodman is your lawyer and just gets you out of anything. It kind of feels like a bit dirty like that.
Better call Teferi.
Yeah, better call Teferi. I think the other thing, similar to extra turns, is that the other thing that this card does, which is salt inducing, that it forces your opponents to wait on you to come back into the game to do your thing. It's this other thing of like, oh, look at me. It's like you guys continue. I'm going to go out of this room and then come back in, but make a dramatic entrance.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm going to wait while you guys sort this out and I'll come back when you've calmed down.
Yeah. I'm not angry. I'm just disappointed.
Yeah. It kind of does a Cyclonic Rift impression in that way where it kind of just goes, none of your stuff matters. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Big time.
Look, I'm going to talk about the elephant in the room, the card that probably induces the most amount of salt and is the most efficient I win card ever to have been printed.
Oh, yeah.
It's Thassa's Oracle.
Yeah.
This comes in at a whopping 2.72.
Is this high? This is higher than anything we've done so far.
This is higher than anything.
Comfortably.
This is the third highest salt score card on the list of EDH racks. This is ridiculously high. But I do want to lump in a group of cards altogether here. I want to lump in other cards that just say, like, literally say win the game on them. Like, not like abstractly, these say win the game on them.
They say, like,
they literally have the words you win the game. Like
if you do
Hellkite
this.
Tyrant, Revel in Riches, Approach of the Second Sun, Halo Fountain, Simic Ascendancy. I could go on.
Yeah.
Have you ever scryfalled the phrase you win the game?
I'm familiar with it because someone in an event that we ran ages ago for the Chuck, the Chris Kringle event. Someone built a deck that was only alternative win cons.
Oh my god!
And it had like 16 of them.
Did it have like Door to Nothingness and stuff? Like
it was like because it was budget as well. So I think it was like
Labman.
It was like no, I don't even know if there's a Labman. There was like a you know that one that's like if this is the only permanent on the battlefield in the end step you win the game.
It's the cheese stands alone, but the actual one, not from the unset.
The mockery of it. Yeah, look, there are quite a few of these. Look, Thassa's Oracle is definitely the easiest condition probably to meet. Like, you just draw your library, or you have, in the case of CDH, obviously, Demonic Consultation or Tainted Pact, and it just happens.
But I mean, it's the easiest condition to meet. So, like, we're looking at Labman in this. You can mill yourself out really effectively. But Thassa's Oracle doesn't need you to draw a card to win the game.
No.
It doesn't need the static ability to be around. So, like, if you go to draw a card and someone kills the Labman in response to that trigger, you die.
Yeah.
Thassa's Oracle is a triggered ability that goes on the stack that no matter what you do, it's on the stack.
Unless the devotion matters, the devotion to blue, if you kill Thassa's Oracle on the stack, doesn't matter. The triggered ability is on the stack. You're not doing anything about it. Yeah, look, I think in general, these just like I win the game cards are pretty boring. I think it depends. Like, so I think Halo Fountain's kind of fun.
Yeah.
He says, having never played against Halo Fountain before. But, you know, like, some of these are just so boring. Revel in Riches, I think, is extremely boring.
I've
wait till
lost
my
to
upkeep.
Revel in Riches before. It's kind of like...
Upkeep win the game effects just feel really unsatisfying. Like, at least with the Hellkite... Hellkite Tyrant's upkeep as well, isn't it?
So is Felidar Sovereign. That's the life
Simic
one.
Ascendancy does the same thing. It's just like... It just goes like, okay, find an answer or I win. It's not dissimilar to some of these other cards that we've covered. It's just like, I'll win unless you answer specifically this one and only thing.
I mean, I played Simic Ascendancy on one of our streams like a few weeks ago, and it was definitely like, oh shit, all right, the whole game is about getting rid of Simic Ascendancy now.
Yeah, it just like drew all the removal. It got removed like 4 times. You kept on bringing it back from your graveyard and like...
Well, I was kind of out of the game in every other way, and I needed to win somehow.
For you to go for it, but they make the game about them, which can be like in some pods people like this. They like the challenge of like, how am I going to deal with this? How am I going to deal with James? Can I kill him on my turn? People might enjoy those things, but I think in general we want our games to be about lots of different cards, not about like deal with Revel in Riches or die.
Yeah, and I think like even in high powered casual, right? Like even in the very high end of casual, we don't see the same kind of combos that we see in CEDH, right?
No.
But we do see Thassa's Oracle because we're seeing people do things like milling themselves out and then reanimating a Thassa's Oracle to close it out. So it's not the same as doing Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation because maybe they're kicking Maddening Cacophony on themselves or something like that. But like, do you know what I mean? Like it's the same win condition, but it's not combo focused, and it's even salt inducing there because it's just so easy to achieve.
And it's so hard to deal with.
It's so hard to deal with.
Like even, you know, the other day we had on stream, our friend Cooper was playing an Enchantress deck, and he was like, oh yeah, by the way, I have a Thassa's Oracle in here because it's a way for me to win if I just draw my whole library. And we were kind of like, that's pretty funny, like whatever. But it's still like, we still have to deal with it. Like if he drew his deck, we have to kind of grapple with the fact that like he doesn't have to have a win con in his hand. He can just Thassa's Oracle.
I was genuinely trying to figure out ways of making him draw cards in my deck. Of like, can I force him to draw a card?
Yeah.
To make him lose in response to it.
Look, when you're in casual games, mostly people are not on counter spells, or if they are, they're protecting their own win cons, right? They're not like leaving up counters to deal with other people's 1-card win conditions. And so specifically in those games outside of CDH, as you say, it's actually even harder to deal with Thassa's Oracle.
Because your decks aren't built for it.
No, you don't stuck with like counter spells like Pact of Negation and all this kind of stuff, and you don't have even Stifle effects. No one plays Stifle effects in Casual Commander, really. Unless they're stapled to other cards like Sublime Epiphany and everything. But,
I mean, I play that.
I mean, Sublime Epiphany, admittedly, is a great out for Thassa's Oracle.
True.
Target player draws a card.
And you can counter the ability as well. You can
can fully
double
blank everything.
ability. Wow. Should be played more in CEDH.
No, it shouldn't.
All right, one more card in the I win category, which
thing.
does drop a little bit on the salt score.
Okay.
This is at 1.8. It's Omniscience.
Interesting.
I was shocked to see this card on the list because of how hard it is to cast.
So it's 7 blue, right? Same casting cost.
blue.
Oh, it's
isn't
10.
I think it's 10. Is it 10 mana?
I'll pull it up.
Or is it 6 blue? Might be.
I think it's definitely a lot. It's 9 or 10.
But if you don't know what Omniscience does, have you been playing Commander ever? It
7 blue. So it's 10 mana.
10 mana in
for
total.
an enchantment that says you may cast spells from your hand without paying their mana cost.
So the reason why this is getting salt, I think, and what we should be looking out for is the fact that this card breaks the fundamental aspect of Magic, being that you need to resource manage your mana and everything like that. This just says, do whatever you want, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, it just puts you on a completely different playing field than your opponents immediately on resolution.
I think, like, you have to be so new to Magic and so unfamiliar with this card to play it in a way where you don't win the game, right?
Yeah.
Like, you'd have to be pretty silly and be dropping this with nothing in your hand and being like, oh, I hope I find something good next turn. Like, obviously, that's not how you play this card. You play this card when you have the capacity to draw 10 cards with a spell in your hand.
Yeah.
And you cast Omniscience first, and then you're like, cool, for free, I'll draw 10 cards. And then I'll play this other card, draw a spell, and draw another 15 cards. I'll play this Crater Hoof Behemoth, I win. You know, like, it's just like, it just gets you there. Look, I like Omniscience for what it is, which is like the blue fantasy, right?
Yeah, you become omniscient.
It's pure power. I kind of enjoy it for that aspect. Admittedly, I don't see it very much.
Neither do I really.
I don't have that much salt towards it because people don't really play it. Like, you kind of have to want, you either got to be cheating a lot on mana costs for spells, like casting Omniscience in a Joda, a deck for 5 mana feels great.
Yeah, because then you cast all of your other big whopper spells.
Well, especially, Joda decks have a bunch of really expensive stuff in it. You got to have like a something of a reason. I don't think you should just put this in every blue deck the way that you could with Expropriate or you could with Cyclonic Rift. Like, you have to have a reason that you think this card on its own wins the game.
Like in a Joda deck. Like, if you Joda allows you to cast any spell by casting it for Wooburg. If you cast Omniscience for Wooburg, you then cast all those other spells that were designed to be put in this deck because your commander is Joda.
Yeah.
So you can immediately then go, free cast Ulamog, free cast this, free cast that.
Or, if you're one of those decks that can, like, swap enchantments on the battlefield with ones in your hand.
Yeah.
So you can cheat out enchantments. Or, you're a deck that's really good at making enchantments cost way less. You know, there's reasons to break it. And for that reason, I think because you kind of need to break it at least a little bit for it to be amazing, I'm kind of fine with it.
I'm kind of fine with it as well.
It depends on the context of the rest of the deck, I guess, in a way that a lot of the cards we spoke about don't.
I would be a lot more salty seeing it in a Joda deck.
Yeah.
If it was just like this spell resolves and all of a sudden I win the game because I can free cast everything.
Yeah.
I understand that that's where the salt comes from.
Yeah, it's probably just like people playing against it and being like, oh my god, every time my friend with the Joda deck wins, it's always Omniscience.
Yeah.
Like, any card that does that in a deck tends to get pretty boring for you as the opponent, and maybe even for the player. So I get that. But look, Omniscience, I'm mostly kind of fine with tentatively.
I think, look, out of this whole category,
the
I win cards, I think that we've found that the cards that induce the most salt are the cards that are just like, A, why wouldn't you run them?
Yep.
Like, they're
ubiquitous.
just ubiquitous.
Yep.
And B, the effect on them is like, look at me, look at me, look at me. Like I'm either going to take a bunch of turns or do something.
Or take all your stuff.
Draw
a million cards.
Or completely set the game to a point where I just win and you have nothing.
And you have to wait as well.
Yeah. Omniscience is one of those cards that doesn't fall into one of those subcategories of I win. You know what I mean?
Big time.
And it's interesting. The overall category, out of the small sample size that we looked at, just summing them up and averaging them out, ends up at 2.17 as an average SALT score of this category.
Which is admittedly, if it's from 1 to 4, it's not insanely high.
It's not crazy high, but I do find that like a lot of SALT scores, because of the sample size of this pool that SALT EDH Rec has, so many scores fall between 2 and 3.
Yeah.
So really what we're looking at is like the decimal points between 2 and 3 to like see the statistical differences between them.
Because there will just naturally, when you poll that many people, be a bunch of, very high-powered players being like, I don't care about that. I don't care about that. I don't care about that. Yeah.
It's like, it's the bell curve, right?
Yeah,
so like the fact that it's 2.7 is above the median of like that bell curve of like it's 2.17. So it's over 2.
Yeah.
But it's not high. And like from what we're about to go into, I think we'll see some differences.
We might see some higher scores.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I think it might be time for a thrifty interlude.
Yeah, this is a break from salty foods, and we'll go have like a sweet treat to cleanse the palate.
Love that. Love that
Nailed
for
it.
us. We've got lots to talk about, including the salty cards that say you lose or that nobody wins. But before that, we're going to hear a little something about a thrifty card. And as is tradition, I will be performing, and this week it's the Cowled Merchant with some new wares. Do you want to read the card we're featuring this week, James?
Yes, and I'm so excited about this. I've been waiting for this one to be performed for a while, mainly because I think the card is cracked. I think this card is sick.
Should be played
is
more.
Rise of the Witch King for 2 black and a green. You get a sorcery that says each player sacrifices a creature. If you sacrificed a creature this way, you may return another permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield.
Ever feel like it might be time for a change of leadership? Do your friendship group of sexy goths sweep obsessively and chant around cauldrons? Well, it might be monarchy time! Picture this. He's made of shadows, immune to hell, hates women, and his family is extremely violent. It's not Prince Andrew, it's the former king of Angmar looking for some friends to go find his dad's favourite necklace or something. I don't know, I don't particularly like being around him, but you will, I'm sure. He might hate you less. Go hang out in a field with a guy who definitely doesn't belong under the daisies. Just don't go anywhere near Pelennor. He'll really hate it there, or anywhere, or kill you. Get budgeted.
Prince Andrew and the Witch King of Angmar being in the same context.
Skit verse expands to include Lord of the Rings and Prince Andrew.
Yeah, now we know Cowled Merchant exists on our plane of existence, Magic's plane of existence.
Sometimes.
And the Lord of the Rings.
Middle-earth. Yeah. I wonder where he'd hang out on Middle-earth. Probably with the hobbits. Seems like...
No, he'd hang out somewhere weirder. Surely it'd be like...
He might be like...
No, he'd hang out with Shelob, surely. Like, he'd just be in a cave.
He'd be at the entrance. You'd go through to try and reach
like,
Mordor, and he'd be like...
Have you ever considered being eaten by a spider? Try Shelob!
Or he'd be like, let me sell you this antidote for when you get stung.
Yeah, literally a snake oil salesman, but spider bite oil salesman.
Spider bite oil, straight up. Yeah, if you douse yourself in oil, she won't be able to smell you, I promise. Anyway, if you enjoyed that, they are released in text form every Thursday in the Greensboro Commander Community Discord server, which is where me and James hang out with our play group and with a bunch of people who we really like. We've got an Ask a Judge channel in there and a Thrifty Thursdays channel, which is where those end up every week.
Yeah, and that card. Oh, so good. People are playing. If you have green and black in your color identity, legit, this is like everyone sacks one thing, but you can reanimate. I'm not sure if you heard my inflection change when I said permanent. It's not return a creature. No, it's a permanent.
It's not even non-land permanent. The floor of this card is ramp.
Yes, get a fucking land back.
Get a fetch land back. Get any land back. Yeah, if you mill at all, or if you care about any permanent type besides creature, in addition to creature.
Like if you're an aristocrat, we were saying just as we went to the Thrifty Interlude, if you are running a Bastion of Remembrance in your aristocrat stack, bring this back.
Or a Phyrexian altar.
Yeah, there
get
you
back
go.
your Phyrexia, get
Or
back anything.
if you're doing like huge reanimation stuff and you're running portal to Phyrexia and
Yeah.
someone removes it, getting back your portal to Phyrexia at the cost of
Yeah.
a creature,
Dude,
pretty good.
Bolas's Citadel, like
Oh.
the possibilities are endless.
Crazy.
Anyway, we should talk about that second category of card that makes us so salty. You lose, I think was how you phrased it.
Yeah, cards that don't say I win when they resolve, but instead say you definitely don't win, my opponents. Or effectively lose them the game. It doesn't, like, Door to Nothingness, for example, is a card that could sit in this category. Didn't really come up on the salt score that high, but I think that that's a card that, like, really says you lose because you lose the game.
You specifically lose,
But we're looking at cards that will say, like, you have no chance of coming back.
It's more like cards that, make it so that your ability to affect the game is none. And so now we're just waiting for someone else to win. It might not be the person who played this card, but it's not going to be you anymore.
And like very similar to the cards that we saw in the I win category, some of these cards are going to need to be built around. And I think that these cards are going to need to be built around a lot more than the I win cards. But when they are built around, holy shit, they are just insane. And like right off the bat, the ones that I want to start with are the cards that scored the highest on the EDH Rec Salt score.
Oh.
Winter Orb is the card that was right at the top. You know, it was second to that. Stasis. You know, it was very close behind. Static Orb.
Right. So the thing that all of these cards have in common. So the scores were, for those by the way, were 2.99, 2.99, 2.72. So we'll see a huge jump here immediately from the cards we were looking at before.
That's what I'm saying. In context of like the difference between 2 and 3.
Yeah.
The highest scoring salt cards are Winter Orb and Stasis.
Very close to 3.
And they're 2.99. So that's as high as we've gotten on the list.
I mean, literally the next highest card we looked at, I think, was a 2.5 or a 2.6 or something. So this is a big step up.
Thassa's Oracle is next down, and it's what was it, 2.5?
2.8 or 2. Yeah, something
this
7
card
or something.
These cards are cracked. And for those that don't know, these are cards that affect players untapping things. Yeah. And when I mean untapping, I mean the entire step of the untap step.
We won't go into exactly what all of them do because they resemble each other enough in this effect. They basically say, players only untap one thing, or players untap 2 things, or
players don't untap anything.
Yeah, which in the case of Stasis, which has a cumulative upkeep as well. Yeah. But look, it basically, if you can't untap, you don't play the game of Magic. Until you deal with these permanents, you don't get to do anything. Sometimes the one thing I'll say for the sake of Static Orb, this is the one where I think if it's tapped, players don't untap.
No, Winter Orb also reads that now.
Right.
These are both cards that there was a really old rule in Magic about artifacts that if they were tapped, their static abilities weren't applied. It was like an off switch, if you would, for artifacts. But that rule has since changed. So now the like Oracle text of Winter Orb says, as long as it's untapped.
Yeah, sure. So like, the tech for a card like Winter Orb is often playing in a deck like Urza Lord High Artificer. Yeah. That literally has a static ability. Yeah.
It's a static ability.
Static ability on him that says tap an artifact.
Sorry, it's an activated ability. You're activating the ability of Urza.
By untapping a thing.
That way Torpor Orb really fucking hoses Urza.
Yeah. But you tap an untapped artifact you control to add a blue. So in this case, you just untap every time, right? You tap the Winter Orb, untap normally, and then at the end of your turn, you just tap it. No one else untaps. That at least shows how you're going to win the game. Most of the time, people are just slowing the game right down when they play a card like this. They might have a way to get out of it, but the reality is you still have to sit there, untap your 1 land, draw a card, go, can't deal with anything, pass, and continue to wait for the person to find the win con. You just don't win.
I think weirdly, I get saltier if someone has played, like, because like with Stasis, for example, Stasis has that cumulative upkeep where, people are... The player of Stasis can't really build around Stasis in the same way that an Urza deck can build around the Winter Orb. Yeah. Because Winter Orb, you tap it, like you said, on the end step before your turn, so it untaps normally in your untap step, and then you pass with it untapped, meaning everyone can't untap as well. Yep. So I find it even more frustrating when someone's built around a Winter Orb than just runs a Stasis. Because at least Stasis is like, holy shit, we need a way to get out of this situation. What if we just make them not untap for a turn or 2 until we do find an answer? Yeah. Play Stasis, pay the cumulative upkeep a couple of times. But Winter Orb is like, once that's down, you have no chance of winning, especially if it's in an Urza deck. Do you know what I mean?
Interesting.
I get more salty at people that play Winter Orb in ways that they can leverage it.
Right. That's so interesting. I think I just like, on principle, I'm so opposed to the idea of just slowing the game down for the sake of slowing the game down. So I think for me, I like, which is totally fine.
I
Like,
think
this is also like, this is where the salt scores vary, right?
Yeah.
It's like there will be people who look at it more like James and people who look at it more like me, which is totally fine. But yeah, like for me, it's like, I want to see how you're going to get out of it. How do you win from here?
I think on principle, I'm more in line with you. Like people that, I think the players that just want to slow the game down for the sake of it, I get more annoyed at them than players that want to leverage powerful cards.
Okay.
But I will get saltier at a player saying, I don't win right now, but you definitely lose.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? That's the thing that I'm getting more frustrated
I think I understand. I understand. Yeah. But look, I understand. I think we agree these are salty, very, very salty for a reason. You just don't get to play the game of Magic in any way that matters. And you just wait. You just wait and wait and wait for whoever finds the way out, whether it's the person who removes the stacks effect, or typically the person who drops it and knows how they're going to win. Yeah. And they have a way out of it with an intruder alarm or something like that.
And it's going to be like a very like, you guys are going to have to wait.
Yeah.
Like a long time for me to win.
Just
like,
sit around.
Just watch me.
Yeah.
And in the same vein, weirdly, the next card that I had on this list was Vorinclex Voice of Hunger.
Oh, this is the old Vorinclex, right?
Yeah.
Like the 8 mana, 6 green. When you tap a permanent for mana, you add an extra mana. Is it that one?
I think it's land specifically.
Oh, land.
Yeah.
And then when an opponent taps a land for mana, it doesn't untap during its opponent's next untap step.
Correct. And this came in at a whopping 2.55 as well. So like this also can cross into the I win category because of that huge boost in mana. I mean, just as an aside, something that I didn't include on this list, but Dockside Extortionist has a salt score of 2.50.
Oh, so quite close.
Very close behind Vorinclex in that I win by giving myself a huge boost of mana.
Yeah, sure.
The only reason I didn't talk about it on this list was because I think that I win through a huge boost of mana is a lot less salt-inducing and a lot less common than I win through all the other effects that we just spoke about, like extra turns and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's fair. Dockside's also just so commonly played that's probably a big part of the reason the salt score is the way that it is. Exactly. People are just tired of losing to it.
Yeah, Brass's Bounty also gives a huge boost in mana, but doesn't win you the game as easily as Dockside. It's 7 mana, and also
all other stuff.
I don't think people are as salty as getting a huge boost in mana than a huge boost in winning the goddamn game.
Yeah. Look, Vorinclex Voice of Hunger, I don't see very much anymore.
Not
to
anymore.
Be completely honest. It was very, very common around, I think it got reprinted in Mystery Boosters, and I saw a lot of it around that time. Look, I will say that every time I've ever seen it resolved, the table collectively goes, okay, who's going to deal with this? Yeah. Like, we can't be using our lands once every 2 turns. It just has to be answered. It's a card that demands an out. I mean, also the fact that it's giving the player who has it double the mana is not helping.
It completely warps the game around it. It's another one of those cards where it's a permanent that it's like, you don't win until that is answered.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that makes it frustrating, because like sometimes a player will play a permanent, whether it's, I don't know, like an Anointed Procession, for example.
Sure.
And it's like, holy shit, that needs an answer. We will lose to that if you keep playing that. But I could win before it. And like, I could just try and get underneath it. I could play my own strategy. I can still play the game. Whereas Vorinclex says, no, you don't even get to play the game as much as I do unless you answer this.
Look, I think in the way this plays out, if you are at all considering playing this card, I can tell you, it will be terribly boring for you because it just gets answered. Like,
pretty much immediately.
When it needs to be answered this desperately, like I think of the times I've seen Vorinclex played, a good 85 to 90% of the time before the player even gets to use the extra mana that they have. Because it's 8 mana, right? Usually you're tapping out to resolve Vorinclex in the hope that next turn you have all the mana. Typically before they even untap, it's been removed. Like
so you don't even get the benefit out of that double mana. It's like you just basically take a turn off to say, hey, answer this.
Yeah, you cast Duress on one of your opponents and got rid of their Swords to Plowshares. That's the effect that you did for this 8 mana spell. It's not fun to play against.
But what the Space Commanders want us to look for is where the salt is coming from. And I think the salt is coming from that fact that it's like, we have to answer it.
We have to answer it right now.
It warps the game around a bit. Also, it's, if it does stick around, you are getting increasingly salty because you are taking 1 turn, effectively, for every 2 turns that the controller of Vorinclex is taking.
It's very, very similar to Stasis and Static Orb in this respect, in that it's just like, okay,
you don't get to play the game
I
anymore.
don't get to do things anymore. And speaking of not getting to do things anymore, I've just seen the next card on the list is Armageddon.
Ew.
2.69 salt score, so a bit higher than Vorinclex.
Hey, 2.69, nice.
Nice. This is just a 4-mana sorcery that says destroy all lands. There are a bunch more of these I can see that you've highlighted. There are another 6.
Yeah.
All with a salt score higher than 2.2, so people don't like these.
They're very frequent. So like I could have listed all of them in order, and we could have talked about each of them.
Ravages of
Yuckle
War.
Hops,
Yeah.
just a million. There's one that destroys all lands when you cycle it, and I was like, what the fuck?
Decree of Annihilation
That's
or
the
something?
one, yeah. And I was like, how the hell is that a card?
Yeah,
like you
crazy.
cycle and it destroys all lands? Stupid.
Look, I will be upfront. I don't think either of us ever see these cards. So take everything we say from here on with a grain of salt if you're legitimately considering playing them. That said, don't play these cards.
Yeah, I think also, like, if you are playing these cards, and like I have seen, I'm not saying I've never seen it. I've seen one deck from a friend of mine that built, like, the whole win condition of the deck was a land destruction spell.
Was this Daniel?
Yes.
Yes, I
Built
also saw
around
this actually,
Fall
now
of
that
the
you're
Throne.
saying it. So specifically, it was playing the 4-color Omnath.
Yes.
And he just played a bunch of those effects that said return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So his idea was, I'll blow up all the lands, I'll immediately bring back all of my lands. And look, to be honest, I was fine with it because he was like, I just win. I win.
Yeah.
Like, if I have 20 lands and none of you have any,
Yeah.
I win the game. And this is the thing about the land destruction thing is like, if you're going to play them, you need to show that you win so people can just scoop.
And
like,
it's an absolute build around. Like, you have to build around one of these cards to make it playable.
Yeah.
Because if you don't build around it, you're in this. This card would immediately fall into, instead of you lose, it would fall into the nobody wins category, which we're talking about next.
Yeah, which is terribly boring for everybody. So yeah, like to be honest, I think the way that Daniel played that Ravages, it was Fall of the Thran. Yeah. The way that he played Fall of the Thran was totally a reasonable thing because it was like, I can see how you win. Again, it's similar to the stasis thing. You just got to avoid being the player who's like, okay, what if the whole game didn't matter? And we just kind of started again. And stasis does that in the form of slowing the game right down. Armageddon goes, okay, what if we all started playing lands from turn 0 again?
And I think that the way of making these land destruction cards less salty, genuinely, just scoop when they resolve. Like, and like, especially if someone has built around them and they do one of those, return all lands to the battlefield under your control. Like, if they've built that and they've successfully pulled that off, that 1-2 punch, just scoop.
Yeah.
Like, you will be a lot happier to shuffle up and play another game with a different deck than you will sitting there trying to replay lands on turn 9.
Yeah.
Like,
definitely. Well, and this is the task of you as the player who wants to play Armageddon as well, is you need to be able to convince your opponents that you have the win. So whether that's showing them, this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring back all my lands, or like, this is what I'm going to do to the rest of your lands if you play more of them. Like, just, you need to demonstrate to them, you need to scoop right now, the game is over.
I've still got a board full of tokens, you've got no blocks, you're not going to be able to deploy any because you don't have lands now. Like,
don't just blow
scoop.
up the lands is the thing. It's being like, this is how I win. I mean, look, funnily enough, that Elishnorn deck you're talking about, the white weenies thing, if you blow up all the lands and all of your 1/1s are 3/3s and everyone else's 2 toughness creatures are dead and their 4/4s are 2/2s,
that's a win.
You probably just win from there.
That's
so
a win.
That's valid.
And I think that this is, I mean, like, we can say that as much as we can, like, try and do this, try and convince your play group, but like, at the end of the day, I'm still not going to enjoy it. Even if you highlight it in Rule 0, I'm not going to enjoy that win condition just because it feels too easy to accomplish.
Yeah.
And it's less of a win condition, isn't it? It's like, it's not saying you win, it's you win in so many turns, but I lose. I definitely lose. And I feel like someone saying to me, I have no chance of winning, hurts a lot more than saying I have 100% chance of winning.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
So it's the difference between being like, okay, I win, which causes you to lose, and being like, no, you specifically lose.
So eventually I'll win.
I'll win. Yeah. It's a different feeling to be told, I'm blanking your deck.
It hurts a lot.
It does.
Speaking of other effects that hurt a lot, there's a great transitions on each of these. I'm now going to talk about Mindslaver, and in the same context, Emrakul the Promised End, and just other turn-taking effects, like Worst Fizz. So these are cards that say you control an opponent during their next turn. Mindslaver came in at a salt score of 2.23
Mm-hmm.
and Emrakul with 2.13. I think Mindslaver pips the post there because it can be reused a lot.
And it's just a lot more castable, right?
Yeah.
Emrakul is the 13 mana, I think.
It does cost one less for each permanent type in your graveyard.
Okay. Like weirdly cares about
permanent type-
delirium
yeah.
or something and
Yeah.
something bizarre. But yeah, it's the casting is harder for sure than Mindslaver, which also admittedly is an artifact. We know there's a lot
Has
of artifact
synergies,
decks.
I play
Commander.
Mindslaver in my... I actually, funnily enough, just did finally take Mindslaver out of my Tornos deck.
Sure.
But I played it for a really long time because it was a viable way of winning.
Totally.
But the reason why I've not put this in the I win category is because this doesn't just say to your opponents that you lose the game. It's that you lose your deck. You lose your turn. You lose your chance of playing with the cards that you specifically sleeved up and brought to the local game store to play with.
Yeah.
And now instead you have to hand your hand over to someone else to watch them use your cards to win the game with your card. Like, that is just painful.
It is painful. It's kind of, I mean, you literally sit there and do nothing. Like we talked about with Stasis and stuff, how you just don't really do anything. You untap, upkeep, and pass. This is almost worse because your deck still works and it still happens, but it's not for you.
Yeah, it's for your opponent.
Yeah, and typically the way, I mean, a good Mindslaver player or Emrakul player will, float all your mana, use your tutor and fail to find,
or use a sacrifice outlet to sacrifice everything
your
for
whole
no
board.
value.
If they know how to play it correctly, they will make sure that you use all your cards in the way that works the worst for you for your next turn.
And even better, best for them. So they'll use your creatures to swing at your other opponents.
Yep, use your removal on your other opponents. Yeah, big thing.
It's rough.
Look, it's similar to a lot of these other cards. People play the game of Commander because they want to play the game of Commander, and this is a card that says you don't get to play the game of Commander.
Yeah,
I do
it's
instead.
not even you lose the game, you lose the fun of playing Commander.
Yeah, straight up.
Yeah.
I find these cards tiresome for sure.
Yeah, my partner convinced me to remove the Mindslaver out of my deck. I took their turn and they were very unhappy with it.
Yeah.
And they were just like, I don't get to play Commander a lot, and I want to play when I get to play.
Yeah.
So
it's a reasonable thing.
I think it's totally reasonable.
Yep. Next, more you don't get to do things. More reasonable, I would say, than stealing everyone's turns. But Narset, Parter of Veils, and Notion Thief are here. Narset
Steal
notably,
your cards.
Narset notably higher here. Specifically, I imagine because it's probably just more playable and a Planeswalker harder to deal with.
Yeah.
Narset 2.04, Notion Thief 1.74, which seems low, but I guess it's Dimir. So
It's the fact that it's two colored.
You just don't see Notion Thief very often. Look, Hull Breacher got banned for a reason. Cards that say your opponents can't draw cards are just... they're very tough to deal with because usually when someone drops a permanent that's a real big problem for you, you draw into a way to deal with it, right?
To answer the problematic permanent, you need to draw cards.
Yeah.
But if you can't draw cards because the problematic permanent is stopping you drawing cards, how do you find the answer for that permanent?
Yeah, my Preordain doesn't do anything anymore. My Ponder does nothing. My not my 3 visits, my card that draws cards doesn't do anything.
List any amount of one-drop blue spells. But in the case of Notion Thief, it's even more egregious that it draws the controller cards instead, and that's pretty brutal.
Yeah, I mean, it's also got flash, right? So someone goes to draw 5 cards and you're like, nope, I'll draw those 5 cards. It's interesting that the card Arms Collector isn't here at all. I would say it just hasn't been printed in a long time. This is the
Arms
white
Collector?
card that does basically Notion Thief.
There's a card that does that?
There's a white card that says if an opponent would draw a card, except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps. I think the difference is it says if an opponent would draw 1 or more cards,
so it only
you
draws
draw a
one
card instead. So if
right.
someone goes to draw 5 cards, you can flash it in and you draw 1.
To be fair,
a lot
the
less
fact
playable.
that that's white is immediately a lot less salty because white needs the help.
White
I'm immediately like, if you're playing that card that I've never heard of, good on you for playing it because I think white deserves that card.
White needs it more than anyone else as well.
Are you Scryfalling
I'm going to
it
pull it
now?
up just to see.
I've never heard of it, which is
I
a
haven't
crazy
seen
thing.
it. I don't think I've ever seen it in a game. I'm just aware of it, and it's always been slightly out of my price
Is
range.
it like really expensive? Is that why?
I don't think so. It's just like pricey. Wow, it's like $1. Interesting. I should play this card. Arms Collector. For 3 and a white, it's a 3/4 with flash.
Yep.
If an opponent would draw 2 or more cards, instead you and that player each draw a card. Oh, that's so much worse.
So much worse.
So now when someone casts Preordain, you can't flash this in and do anything.
Okay, that's why no one plays it.
Yeah.
And why it doesn't have assault score, because it's actually bad.
And also, instead, you and that player each draw a card. So they still
you
get
don't even
a card.
it doesn't even fall into this category of you lose.
No, they still get a card. They just don't get 4 or 5 or whatever they were going to get. That's pretty bad.
I could see a world in mono white where you'd want to run that card.
I think it's fine, but I agree it doesn't shut your opponents down the same way that Narset and Notion Thief do.
Yeah, Narset saying that your opponents can't draw more than one card and Notion Thief replacing those cards in your hand.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Look, I understand why these cards are salty. I understand why they're not that salty, because I think there's obviously a lot worse things we can be doing. But yeah, just not being able to... Look, we talk about how important card draw is in our decks. We've emphasized it a lot recently of saying play 15 to 20 bits of card draw in your decks. And
I think the reason it's like salty is because to answer it, you need to draw cards.
Yes,
but the problem is
that
they're stopping you drawing cards. That's where the salt comes from.
Definitely.
Next card. I've got Blood Moon on this list as another example. This comes in at a flat 2. If you're not familiar with Blood Moon turns all non-basic lands into mountains. And there is a new card that I forget, that Harbinger of the Tides, I think it's called.
Yeah, that sounds right.
A lot of people are calling it Flood Moon because it does the same thing, but instead of turning them into mountains, it turns them into islands.
Which for Merfolk is really good because there's a lot of ways to give Merfolk Island War specifically, so it works really well. But yeah, importantly here, when something becomes a mountain, it loses everything else that it does or can do and is just a land that taps for red.
Yeah.
It has no other text on it whatsoever, so obviously this is great for answering utility lands and stuff, but the most important thing it does is if you're playing a very expensive or just very color-intensive mana base with 3-color, 2-color lands, all of those just produce red now.
And are you not in red? Too bad. You've got red mana. And I think that's where the salt comes from, right? It's one of these effects that, again, just... If you're in a 3+ color, even if you're in red and 2 other colors plus, having only access to red mana, and especially because this is an enchantment, and red has a very hard time dealing with enchantments.
Yes, it's true. So the likelihood you have a card that you can cast with your red mana to deal with this red enchantment is very low.
Very low. And it just completely locks people out of games.
Yeah.
Like, if you're in 3 up colors, I think any mana base, even if it's cheap, even if it's very expensive, I think any deck that's 3 colors and up, against a Blood Moon, you are really struggle.
You have to be playing 2 or 3 color lands in 3 or more colors in order to have a functioning mana base. And if all those are red now, it just doesn't do anything. Yeah, like, look, often when a Blood Moon is cast, if someone's on 1 color, they're like, okay, like, I can pretend that these 3 non-basic lands are just colorless for the sake of this, but I have my 10 islands here. I'm fine.
Can still cast blue spells.
Yeah, and that person's totally fine now. And if anything, the Blood Moon player now needs to really worry about that player because now they can't be interacted with by the other people. But yeah, look, just not being able to tap your lands for the colors that they're supposed to tap land colors for, it's not a good feeling.
The common trend with this category is like you don't get to play the game.
Yeah.
That's where the salt comes from. It's not the you lose aspect, is it? It's that you lose the ability to even try.
Yeah.
That's what I get salty at.
It's just like the things that you came to Commander to do, like cast your spells, like draw your cards, like tap your mana so to cast your spells, don't happen anymore. Yeah, big time.
In context of stuff that you don't get to do in terms of casting your spells, Draneth Magistrate also came in very high on this list.
Makes sense.
2.4.
Wow, that is high.
Whoppingly high. This was in the top 10. Also, I'm going to put in this category Void Winnower. This came in just below Salt Score of 2, 1.98, but still like within the top, 25, 30 cards in the Salt Score list.
Void Winnower was the one where your opponents can't cast even spells or block with even creatures.
Yeah, they just can't even.
They can't even. Draneth Magistrate for 1 and a white, your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands.
The command zone is not your hand.
Yeah, so that's the big thing about Draneth Magistrate, I think. If it blanked everything else, it would probably be okay, but it's the fact that it's a 2-mana creature that comes in usually before any other commander has come in and says, until you answer this thing, you can't play the format of Commander, which involves having your command zone.
The other big thing for me with Draneth Magistrate is it's one-sided. It could, white could very easily say players can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hand.
And that'd be fine.
And I think the salt score would be so much lower.
Yeah.
But the fact that this card says opponents can't do something, and it's 1 and a white, like it's 2 mana, this arguably should go in every white colored commander deck
Big time.
ever to be printed.
If you were not worried at all about Salt and you were not worried at all about your opponents and you just wanted a powerful deck, if you were in white, it's so hard to think of a reason you would not play Drannith Magistrate.
Yep.
It's like, well, why not? I'm stopping my opponents casting their commanders. It obviously, of course, is going to affect things like flashback, things like other, casting things from exile, which will be relevant against red decks. There's lots of things it'll be effective against, but mostly just being like a 2-mana creature for 1 and a white that says your opponents don't get their commanders. That's unbelievably powerful in our format.
Yeah.
And Void Winnower, I think I understand why the Salt score's a lot less because it's also only blanking half the cards.
It's also 9 mana to cast. It's one of those spells that's like if you resolve it, you kind of deserve that time with Void Winner on the board. It's also one-sided, but it's also one of those things where it's like it's still answerable. You know? Like you can still find your, Soul Shatter gets rid of Void Winnower pretty effectively. Like you can still
Swords to Plowshares.
Get out of it.
Big time. I think I understand why both of those cards are there, though. They just say half your deck doesn't work, or in the case of Drannith Magistrate, most of your deck, really.
Yeah,
most of us build around that
commander. Yeah,
but your deck just don't work anymore.
So overall, the you lose category averages out at a 2.4.
That's a lot higher than before.
Yeah, we were at like 2.1 before with I win. So like already we are noticing that cards that say you lose, like you don't get to win, are way more salty than cards that say I win.
Yeah.
Immediately, which is interesting.
Definitely. There's one category of card I expected to see here, but I think it's only a particular sort of player, which was Mill.
Oh, yeah, interesting. Mill has caused salt at some of our tables in the past.
I think there's a really interesting thing here. I think if you were to poll only new players, Mill would be up here in this category.
Yeah.
I think there are people who see their cards get milled and feel like it's like you lose, of like, oh, I don't get my card anymore.
Yeah.
I don't get to play that part of my deck anymore. Whereas like more experienced players tend to look at it and go like, oh no, like I have the rest of my deck. Like that's fine. I can go without this card. Anyways, it's like an interesting thing there.
Interesting.
But,
I think that, new players mistake it, but like experienced players go, if you're milling me, I can utilize that in a weird way.
Yeah, I might have my Sun Titan that I can cast now.
My deck is equipped to handle that kind of stuff.
But look, I think the category in general of you lose being a lot higher than I win makes sense to me.
I personally just get more salty if I don't get to play the game.
Yes. I'd much rather that someone do something where I'm like, oh man, I have to deal with this thing or they win.
I have to figure it out.
Then play against something of being like, oh, okay, I guess the game of Magic as I understand it is no longer taking place. It's a very different feeling.
Yeah.
And more salty.
And I'll tell you what, it is a completely different feeling to either of those.
Sure.
Is the category nobody wins.
Yeah, okay.
So this is our final category of the salty cards. We've been talking for a while, but there's a few cards that I noticed that are in the salts score list from EDH Rec that don't necessarily say I win, don't necessarily say you lose. They just kind of, excuse my French, fuck it all up. They just absolutely shift the game. And like, let's look at a recent unban.
Okay.
Let's look at Wildfire.
Oh, so 6 red. It's a
Triple
9
red.
mana sorcery.
Yeah.
I think it exiles all creatures, all hands, and all something.
You're really close. Exile all permanents, all cards from hands, and all graveyards. And everyone's life total becomes 1.
Yeah.
That's it. And this
then
came
you
in
exile it on resolution, I think, as well, right?
This came in pretty high. It came in at 2.04.
Interesting. I think there's a really cute way you win here, which is with the Chandra that gives people an emblem that says in your upkeep you take a damage.
That would be a great way to win.
That's
I
cute.
think. Like if you can resolve a Chandra emblem where everyone in their upkeep takes 1 point of damage.
Because an emblem is not a permanent, so that's not getting exiled, and so suddenly you just go cast Wildfire, pass the turn, everyone on their upkeep dies. That's kind of fun. Look, I guess you basically turn the game of Commander into something that it wasn't, because you're fully resetting, right? You're just like, whoever resolves the first small creature.
Whoever finds end the festivities first wins the game.
Yeah, whoever finds a burn spell, whoever finds the ability to make 2 tokens. Like, you just reset the game and turn it into like a mini game of like a race of who can kill you the fastest.
And I can see why it got unbanned, because even after it got unbanned, no one's playing this card. No one wants to win with this kind of effect. And also, it's actually really hard to pull off. Like, if you want to win with that cute little Chandra emblem plus this, that is an insane amount of mana to do.
I think, like, Probably the way you do it, ironically, is with a card like Teferi's Protection, right? You just
Cast
go
this
like,
and in
I'm
response-
gone,
Yeah.
and then I'll Worldfire. So
pretty
you
funny.
guys get nothing and I'm fine.
So like cast Wildfire in like hold priority,
Yeah.
cast Teferi's Protection,
Yeah.
phase out first.
Yeah.
That's pretty fun.
That would be
I actually
fun.
think that's really cool.
I think you would still, your hand would still go, but you'd keep everything. So that would be the main thing. If you just have 3 creatures, then you win.
But do you see what I mean? Like, it's not a card that says you lose, I win. It's
No.
a card that just says, well, it's
Something happens.
nobody wins, but something's going to happen. In the same vein, you've had an experience with this card. Thieves Auction.
Oh, yeah.
This came in at 1.98.
So we're already going down a bit. Yeah, look, it just...
I'll read the card
Okay,
first, because
okay, okay.
it's definitely, I think these cards are the cards that no one sees.
Yeah, sure.
But you have seen this. It's
I have.
4 red. Set aside all cards in play. Starting with you, each player chooses one of the cards set aside and puts it into play tapped under their control. Repeat this process until all those cards have been chosen. Every permanent.
It's so weird. The experience I had when this card was cast was that there were obviously great permanents that got nicked immediately. So someone had a Rhystic Study. So it's like, okay, obviously if you have the choice, you take Rhystic Study.
Weirdly, the Oracle text says all non-token permanents, which I just noticed.
Oh, right.
So tokens don't get included in Thieves Auction.
Weird.
Randomly.
I think then the thing that happens is people take like obviously great synergy pieces that they don't want their opponents to have. Like if someone's got a Rampaging Baloths, you're like, look, I might play a land, whatever. That seems like it's worth it for me. But then what happens is you get to a point where there's cards that are not so great that you want to cut your opponents on them, but they wouldn't do anything for your deck. And so you kind of like, actually, I think I'd just rather have my cards back. And likewise for lands, you're like, I don't really want a Jeskai land in my Teamer deck.
Yeah.
I'll take my Teamer land
I just
again.
want my mana base.
Yeah.
I built my mana base for a reason.
And so what ends up happening is it's kind of more like choose the 5 best permanents on the battlefield and then in turn order pick one.
Yeah.
And then that's it. That's the whole card.
So I think the reason why this is on the Salt Skull list is because when this is resolving, when you resolve a spell, it's like Swords to Plowshares. Okay, Swords to Plowshares resolves, that gets exiled, goes to exile, you gain the life, whatever. Resolving Thieves Auction is a process, and it takes such a long time.
I mean, at the time that this card is cast, because it costs 7 mana, there are typically, 20, 30, 40 permanents on the board.
Non-token permanents.
True.
Tokens, for some reason, don't get included.
But even so, like if you're, let's say it's turn 7, everyone's got 7 lands, maybe more, a couple of rocks, some creatures. Like it's likely to be 40 permanents on the board, non-token, and you're choosing them one by one. It's just like, it completely puts the game on hold.
Yeah.
Nothing happens till it resolves. The game that happens afterwards is similar, but kind of completely stuffed up from what it was before. It just kind of...
you end up accidentally going home with a Rhystic Study in your deck box because you had it on your battlefield.
It's just... To be honest, it weirdly resembles some of those you lose cards to me, where it's kind of like, rather than play the game of Magic, we're all going to play something different. And so rather than play with our cards and in the way that we want to, let's all throw everything around and play a new game where you have the best permanents from that person's deck.
Yeah.
And I have your 4 lands. And it's like, what is this game that we're playing now? It doesn't really feel like what we set down for when we wanted to play Commander together.
Even worse than that, we end up with cards like Scrambleverse, which funnily enough came in lower on the Salt Skull than Thieves Auction at 1.8. But
I suspect that's just how played it is, right? Like if people were playing this often, it would be a much higher score because it's just stupid.
It does basically the same thing. For each non-land permanent, choose a player at random. Then each player gains controls for each permanent that they were selected for. So it does Thieves Auction, but completely random. So you might end up with all lands. You might end up with no lands. You might end up with the best things. You might end up with the worst things. It's just chaos for chaos' sake. Same thing with Warp World. Warp World came in at 1.8.
Okay.
Does the same thing. It's just, it's a coin flip of what happens. And it just makes the game of Magic not matter.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can even throw... Basically, all Chaos cards go in here. Possibility Storm is one that comes to mind.
Card,
just like when cards don't do... When the game of Magic becomes about something that it wasn't before, like Scrambleverse is like, okay, how do you win with not your deck? It's like, okay, this is not the game I sat down for. When I wanted to play Commander, I had these 100 cards and a goal of what I wanted to do, and I understood I might be stopped and I might prevent you from doing stuff, but mostly I thought we were all going to compete in this way. They're just cards that say, rather than play the way that we want to, nobody wins. Nobody wins in this scenario. Someone who's just started playing Magic typically finds effects like this funny. They're like, wouldn't it be funny if everything's random? And it's like, after you've done it 2 or 3 times, you realize, no, it's not funny. It's just kind of like, what if Magic wasn't Magic anymore?
If you enjoy chaos in your decks, but you know, like people are telling you, like Walt and I very frequently say, we don't like playing against chaos decks because of these reasons.
Yeah.
You should try Plains Chase. Genuinely play Plains Chase because it's so much of that effect, but so symmetrical and it's done in such a way where each player still can play around the effects of the Plane Chase cards.
People have agency in a game of Plane Chase because they can roll the plane a die to try and get off a plane. They can roll it multiple times.
They can put all their resources into getting off that plane.
Yes, and they know that there's a likelihood that the next plane benefits them more than the one they're currently on.
Yeah.
And so randomly, it introduces a chaotic element to the game, but there's still agency from the players and an ability to engage in it. And also, literally, when you sit down to play Commander, you see, and someone's like, we're going to play Plane Chase. Here's the Plane Chase cards. Like, it explicitly tells you we are playing a different kind of Commander in a way that, like, Scrambleverse does not tell you. Even if you have it in a Rule Zero conversation, like, you don't really understand until it resolves. Like, oh, no, we're playing something different now.
Yeah. I mean, for those that don't know, Plane Chase, just so everyone's on the same page.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Plane Chase is a separate deck that sits in the middle of the table, has a symmetrical effect, and then an effect that anyone can have a 1 in 6 chance of getting, which is usually very beneficial. Like, it gives you +1 counters, or it gains you life, or it kills something, or whatever. Like, it's just an extra way of playing. It's like an add-on. It's like the DLC of Commander, I guess. But it's everyone knows what they're getting in for. And cards like Warp World, Scrambleverse, even Possibility Storm, they're cards that no one really understands until they've played against it once or twice.
Big time.
Weirdly, in this category as well, I do want to throw in cards like Teferi's Puzzle Box.
Oh, sure.
This came in like way lower than anything we've talked about. This was 1.35.
Sure.
And if you're building this into a Wheels deck, like if you're putting this in your Nekusar deck, this is very, very strong. Basically, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, you take all of your cards in your hand, put them to the bottom of the library, and then draw that many cards. I think the reason why this has a SALT score and is on the list is because there's a bit in Magic that doesn't get talked about enough, in my opinion, and it's planning your next turn.
Yeah.
And Teferi's Puzzle Box completely removes that. And I think a lot of the SALT from Teferi's Puzzle Box comes from the fact that everyone's turn now takes 10 minutes longer because they have to look at all the cards in their hand, consider all their lines, and everyone's turn is now one of those turns where it's like, sorry guys, I'm in the tank, I gotta think about this.
Yeah, it just drastically slows down the game. I understand why people play it in wheel decks, that kind of thing.
Yeah, really strong in there.
Yeah. Obviously decks like Nekusar, as you say, or even Xyrix? I don't know.
It's got an X and a Z in the same word. Don't do that.
Oh, who knows? And anyway, when your opponents draw cards, you make snakes, and that's typically how you win. Makes sense in a deck like that. But yeah, it fully does just say, you can't plan your turn.
Yeah.
Your resources don't represent what they actually are. Tutors don't matter anymore unless they can be played and then immediately cast the thing that you tutor for. Like, it changes the game drastically. I think it's interesting, this whole category averages out to only 1.8.
Way lower than the other two categories.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I understand, like, that we talked about many saltier cards than these, which makes sense. I think, to be honest, that the main thing keeping the score of this section down is something that I already mentioned, which is just that I don't think people play this very often. Yeah, you don't see this. It's funny that, like, cards like Teferi's Protection are so high up there, where I would say they're not very salty. Like, on the card,
we see them so much.
We see them all the time, like a Cyclonic Rift, like the One Ring.
And I think weirdly that actually gives us a bit more of a warning light, like a bit more of a, oh shit, we should be careful when we look at cards like Chaos cards.
Yeah,
because when they are played, they're super salty, but they've got a low SALT score because they're not frequently played. Yeah, because everyone knows how fucking annoying they are to play around.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Big time.
So, like, from what the Space Commanders wanted us to look at, I think we've identified the common themes along this journey of very, like, salty cards, of cards that we should look out for that represent cards that are on this SALT score list, though we can be careful when we are building our decks. And I think the common themes that we've found are, firstly, that win the game effect. So, like, cards that win the game too efficiently with insane card advantage or mana advantage.
Yep.
That's a big one.
Yep.
Or with win the game straight up just stapled onto the card.
Yep.
Or one-sided wipes.
Yeah.
And these are one-sided wipes that are ubiquitous as
Yeah,
well. They're
yeah.
much more frequently seen.
Any of these cards that are just too efficient for what they do. And like, there's a reason when we spoke about Cyclonic Rift that we specifically highlighted that there is not an alternative to Cyclonic Rift.
Even like the card that everyone's freaking about,
Yep.
Ugin's Binding.
It's just not even remotely close
Nowhere
in its
near.
power level ceiling and in its ubiquity as Cyclonic Rift is. There's a reason that those cards are the way they are. There is not a Teferi's Protection budget version. There is Clever Concealment, which does an impression in terms of surviving a board wipe. There are not cards that do Teferi's
There's heroic
Protection.
intervention, but it's not even close to that.
It's not a fog and a protection spell
All
and a
stapled
counter spell
together, yeah.
and your life total can't change and a phase out. Like, you can't do all those things the same way you can with Teferi's Protection.
The other thing that we were looking for, well, that we noticed was cards that say you lose, and this is where we stop our opponents from really playing the game was the thing we found by either removing access to cards, removing them from casting spells, or accessing their mana, either in their untap step or by blowing up lands or that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, we spoke about this a while ago now, but in the stacks threshold. But really, you just got to think about when you play a card that stops your opponent from doing something, how crucial is it that they get that thing that you're stopping them from doing? So stopping your opponents from untapping, how important is it to untap? Very, very important.
Yeah, well, in the difference between when we spoke about in the stacks threshold, we spoke about soft stacks versus hard stacks.
Yes, exactly.
These are what the stacks that we saw in this episode were all hard. They're all hard.
Yeah, I think the card draw you could maybe say gets a little bit soft, possibly, but it depends how important it is to draw cards, and it depends on the effect and whether you're wheeling and all these other kind of things. But yeah, stopping your opponents from getting to play the game of Magic tends to be salt-inducing because we all come to play the game of Magic. And in a similar vein, the last category was about, are you making the game end in an act of pure chaos or randomness? Or are you making the things that have happened in the game so far meaningless and completely different than what they were before? People are understandably going to be salty that the decisions they made don't matter anymore.
Yeah, so I guess what I could recommend, considering we just did an episode on Group Hug, is replace all of these salty cards with Group Hug cards, and then you'll have friends.
I like it.
That's the message.
I like it.
Look, some cards are incredibly powerful, but is running these cards worth losing friends, or being deemed the threat for the rest of your life, or worse, people not wanting to play Commander with you ever again? Not at all. Identifying what these cards are and what makes them salty can ensure we take caution when analyzing new cards for the future before we put them into our deck. After all, we all want to play this wonderful format and have good games with our friends. So, Space Commanders,
Command received.
Lengthy list of cards in this episode. We've not done an episode where we've just talked about cards ad nauseum.
Not for a long time. So to you
thanks for
listeners
sticking with us
out there, do you feel commanded? What do you think of the salty cards we listed, and which ones have you been guilty of including in your decks? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, I'm actually really curious because I admitted to running a few. You run Expropriate, I run Mindslaver.
Yeah, we've all done it, and I want to know if there's any that you still play and whether we've convinced you to maybe consider cutting some. I'd be interested to hear that for sure.
And you can tell us on any social media platform of your choice, @GetCommanded on all of those, or the best place to do it really is every Monday night at 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/GetCommanded, where you can join us and watch us play these salt-inducing cards. Well,
or mostly avoid them.
Mostly avoid them. We'll probably try and not play them, especially the turn-taking effects. God, that is hard to play over stream.
We have specifically realized we need to avoid doing that over stream. It's not a good thing. But and if you are not able to watch it live, you can of course check us out on YouTube at Get Commanded over there as well. And we'd be lost, as we said at the start of this episode, without our patrons over on Patreon. We've linked the Patreon page in the show notes. It's the absolute best way to support the Get Commanded podcast and the things that we make and do. So we'd like to thank our patrons, Fuzzy, Bottomless Potamus, Dyer, and Dylan Norg, and Birdie. And we'd also like to make a special shout out to Fletcher Cutting and Wizard Down Under, who support us in the Space Commander tier. You're the best.
You are the best, and also the best, and really they are the best because I went around for a meeting with these guys just the other day.
Oh, yeah.
Palms Off Gaming.
Yeah.
These guys are our sponsor of our podcast and just make the best deck accessories like sleeves and deck boxes and binders. Their binders are next level.
Yep.
And I got to see some new stuff that they're working on, which is really exciting. And
keen to hear about that.
got a shitload more sleeves from them just because they love us and I need to upgrade some decks. So you can check all of the amazing stuff out at palmsoffgaming.com.au/#getcommanded and you get a cheeky 10% off your purchase at the same time. So it's palmsoffgaming.com.au/#getcommanded.
Oof. Long time talking about magic.
Big episode.
I
over
reckon
an hour and a half there.
It might be time to planeswalk out of here.
Yeah.
Talk about something non-magic related. James, I think it's your turn.
Yeah, considering we've done Salt for a while, let's talk about something nice, something lovely.
Sure.
I went to the cinema recently.
Oh, yeah?
And saw Inside Out 2.
Oh, I keep on seeing posters for this everywhere. How was
Dude,
it?
Unbelievable. You gotta
Yeah?
go see. Did you like the first one?
I did like the first one.
This second one just takes it to a whole new level.
There's a bunch of new emotions in her head, right? Because it used to be fear, disgust, anger, joy, and sadness, I think,
Correct.
with a 5. And now they've got like ennui, anxiety.
Yep. And then they've got envy.
Envy.
And
makes sense.
also, anxiety and embarrassment was the other one that they had.
Embarrassment, right.
Because effectively the whole plot of this movie is that she goes through puberty.
Right.
And-
makes sense. The emotions that a pubescent child can feel are very different to a prepubescent
Well,
child.
they become more complex,
They do.
right?
They do.
It's a little bit,
I mean, we even saw that at the end of Inside
Yeah.
Out, right? Was that she started to have memories that were coded in happiness and sadness
Yes.
simultaneously. And
Something that I think was beautiful about this film, there's two things that I really wanted to highlight how good this film was at doing. Firstly, the first movie was a movie about accepting that you have emotions. Just accepting that sadness is a thing that we as humans
part of your
all
life,
feel.
and it's okay.
It's okay to feel sad, and it's like a very an early childhood development of sometimes it's sad, and that's okay.
Yep.
This film took that one step further and gave the lesson of you have emotions, but you are not your emotions. And it created this very distinct... And in a really I can imagine child psychologists around the world going, yes!
Well, they consulted a bunch of them for the first film, so I imagine they probably did the same for the second. Because, they know that there are specific emotions that they can measure in the
anxiety
brain.
is the big one in this film. I
right.
don't want to spoil a lot, but anxiety is a very featured emotion in this film.
Yeah.
And that's the second thing that I think it did really well. As someone that has had anxiety attacks and panic attacks, this film nailed it.
Right.
Absolutely nailed what it feels like to have a full-blown anxiety attack. And at the end of it, made you feel better about almost having one, being like,
this is just part of the human experience,
Yes.
and people have been there before. It's always validating to know,
yeah.
you're not alone in the emotions that you have in your head.
And it does that beautiful thing of separating you from your emotions. You are not sad. You are Walt and you are feeling sad.
Yes, sadness is not who you are.
Correct. And I just thought it was beautiful. And again, the animation, it's a Pixar film.
Yeah, always
so
amazing.
Great.
They get better every time.
Yeah, and it's a feel-good film. And I will say that it got me very close to some tears being dropped. And it was mainly there's a bit right at the end, and Joy... The character Joy starts glowing and there's a trail of light going towards the console. And there's this beautiful line where Sadness says to Joy, Riley wants you. And I was like, oh, that's beautiful. The fact that she wants to be happy. That's and it was one of those moments at the end of the film. I was like, damn straight, we all want to be happy. It was really, really well done.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Oh, how cool. I'll have to go see it.
It's in cinema. It's only just come out. So please, everyone, go see Inside Out 2.
I'm shocked
Phenomenal film.
that you made it there, because I know you've been looking after Theo a lot lately, but...
Theo was feeling pretty comfortable, and I was like...
Did they come along?
Yeah.
Oh,
it was
great.
Good. With Theo and I went together. We went gold class, because a bit of
cool.
it was our first proper outing since surgery. So
nice.
I was like, do you feel up to going out?
Yeah,
and they were
yeah.
honestly, where we if we're sitting down, we're
Yeah.
fine.
I feel so much better about the fact that I'm making both you and Theo come
You're
to...
not making us,
well,
we're
but
coming.
You're coming to the theater this evening. I felt so bad. I was like, oh my God, Theo's recovering and everything. I hope they're going to be okay.
If they're sitting down, we'll be fine. Yeah.
No, I've got closing night of my show, and this is recorded, so by the time you hear it, my show will be over, but yes, it's home stretch. Anyway,
Congrats, man.
Thank you.
Big one. I'm super excited to see it tonight.
Yeah,
I thought I was going to miss out, but it's really good.
Keen that you managed to come along. But yeah, that's all we have time for. So we'll see you next Friday for another transmission from the Space Commanders.
Goodbye, salty sea dogs.
Bye, salt men, people.
Sure.